Tree diagrams. Draw a tree diagram that illustrates the different ways to flip a penny, nickel, dime, and quarter. So a tree diagram is a way to systematically count objects in a set or list objects in a set. And what it is we start out with branches, and then from those branches we can add other branches to identify the different objects in the set. So some tree diagrams are horizontal, like this one. And then some can be written vertical, like this one. It doesn't matter how you write it, vertical or horizontal. It just matters that you put the appropriate branches to the appropriate objects. So here we're going to draw a tree diagram that illustrates the different ways to flip a penny, nickel, dime, and quarter. Now when we flip each of these things, we have two different outcomes. We can either land on heads or we can land on tails. So with my tree diagram, the branches are going to represent the objects or the outcomes. And then the level of branches is going to represent either the penny, nickel, dime, or quarter. So let's take a look. First, I'm going to flip a penny. So here I have a penny, and I have two outcomes for the penny. I can either have a heads or a tail. Now my second flip is a nickel. So I'm going to draw two branches from each of these outcomes from the penny. And this column is going to represent the outcomes of the nickel. So again, I can either have a head or a tail for the nickel. So on each of these branches, I'm going to write heads or tails. After I flip the nickel, I'm going to flip a dime. So the third set of branches is going to represent the outcome of the dime. And again, I have two outcomes when I flip a dime. It can either be heads or tails. Lastly, I'm going to flip a quarter. So I'm going to draw branches from each of the previous outcomes to represent the flip of the quarter, or the outcome of the quarter. So now this set of branches is going to represent the quarter, and I can have a heads or a tail. And sometimes the tree diagram can get a little messy. So when you're doing these, just make sure to give yourself a little bit more room to write all of the outcomes. Okay, so this is my tree diagram. If you'll notice, I have 4 different levels of branches. the penny, the nickel, the dime, and then finally the quarter. Now that I've drawn the tree diagram, I'm going to write all of the different outcomes. So we'll use the tree diagram to write all the outcomes. First, we'll start at the penny, and I'm going to look at this branch, which is a head. So I can have heads, 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 and heads. So that's one outcome. So H, 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 H is a possible outcome. Next, I can have heads, 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 or tails. So now I have H, 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 T. Next, I can have H, or heads, heads, tails, and heads. So this is H, H, T, H. And notice I'm taking a systematic approach. I'm doing all the heads first, then after each branch I'm doing the tails. Okay, so I'll start with the heads again. So I have heads, heads, tails, and then tails. So heads, heads, tails, tails. Now again, I'm going to look at the H for the penny. So I have heads, but now I can go heads, tails, heads, heads. I can go heads, tails, heads, tails. Heads, tails, tails, heads. And finally, heads, tails, tails, and tails. So now I took care of all the outcomes if I were to flip a heads on the penny first. Now I'm going to take care of all the outcomes if I were to flip a tails on the penny first. So I have tails, heads, heads, heads. Next, I have tails, heads, heads, tails. Tails, heads, tails, heads. Tails, heads, tails, tails. Tails, tails, heads, heads. Tails, tails, heads, tails. and then tails, 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 head, and tails, 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 tails. So if I count all of these outcomes, I should have 16 outcomes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I have all of the outcomes listed on the screen. Now that I've written all of the outcomes, I need to identify the number of ways that I can get exactly one head. So if we look at our first outcome, I have 4 heads. So that's not going to work because I want just one head in my outcome. Here I have 3. I also have 3 on this one. I have 2 on this one. I have 3. I have 2. I have 2. And then I have 1. So I'll circle that because that's one way to get exactly one head. If I look at this one, I have 3 heads, then I have 2 heads, I have 2 heads, and then 1 head, 2 heads, 1 head, 1 head, and then 0 heads. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4 ways to get exactly one head when I flip a penny, nickel, dime, and quarter. So my answer is 4 ways. When you go to MyMathLab, you'll first be asked to select the correct tree diagram among 3 different choices. If we look at these tree diagrams, we'll see that the correct answer is choice A. Make sure to pay close attention to the penny, nickel, dime, and quarter columns to make sure that they all have heads and tails. Once you select the correct answer and check your answer, the computer will give you the next question. There are exactly blank ways to get one head. We'll put our cursor in the answer box and type in 4. Check your answer and move on to the next question.